Welcome, everyone. Get ready for a deep dive into, one of Shakespeare's real showstoppers, Julius Caesar. And yeah, we're going past the usual Romeo and Juliet stuff here. This one's got Roman history, political scheming, backstabbing, the works. Seriously, it's got some seriously relevant stuff for today, too.
It's wild to think about how much this play would have hit home for folks watching it back in Shakespeare's day.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, imagine they're watching a play about a leader getting assassinated, right?
Yeah.
And meanwhile, their own country is on edge, wondering who's going to take over for their aging queen. Talk about intense.
Whoa, okay, so we're talking 1590s, right? Queen Elizabeth I, no heir, rumors flying around England about unrest, maybe even full-blown rebellion brewing. Sounds like ancient Rome wasn't too different from good old England back then.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Shakespeare goes and premieres Julius Caesar right smack in the middle of all this, around 1599. You can't tell me he wasn't making a point, right? Holding up a mirror to his own society, getting them to think about ambition and what happens when things get too unstable in the political arena.
Makes you think. Okay, so we've got this backdrop of political tension in both the play and Shakespeare's England. But what about Caesar himself? The guy's assassinated in Act 3. You'd think he'd stick around a bit longer, right? I mean, if he's gone so early, why is he considered such a big deal?
Man, that question has puzzled audiences for centuries. Even though Caesar exits fairly early on, his impact, his influence, you just can't escape it. It's woven into the very fabric of the play.
Right, I get you.
It's like he's that northern star he compares himself to in the play.
Right.
Fixed, constant, even in death. His assassination is like the catalyst. It sets off this whole chain reaction that we see unfold.
He casts a long shadow even after he's gone. But was Caesar a good guy? A power-hungry tyrant? Shakespeare doesn't really seem to give us a straight answer, does he?
You hit the nail on the head. The ambiguity is part of what makes him so fascinating. Was he a brilliant leader who brought Rome stability and prosperity, or was he turning into a tyrant? It's a debate that was going on even when Shakespeare was alive. On one hand, he was a war hero, beloved by the common people. On the other, he seemed to ignore warnings, surround himself with yes men, maybe enjoying the power a little too much.
Oh, yeah, and let's not forget that whole crown business.
Ah, yes.
When Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man, offers him the crown not once, not twice, but 3 times, Caesar turns it down. But it's like he's playing to the crowd, right? Testing the waters, almost hoping they'll beg him to be king. Even Casca, who's a senator, one of the guys plotting against Caesar, he even comments on how staged the whole thing seemed.
It makes you think about the motivations of people in power, doesn't it? Are they ever truly selfless, or is there always a degree of calculation in their actions?
So we've got Caesar, complex and ambitious. Now, let's bring in the guy who masterminds his downfall, Cassius. Who was he, and what was his problem with Caesar?
Cassius. He was one sharp cookie, a savvy politician, that's for sure. He saw Caesar's ambition as a clear and present danger to the Roman Republic, and he wasn't afraid to play doty to get what he wanted.
Ruthless.
Oh, yeah. He's the one whispering doubts about Caesar in Brutus's ear. Feeding him half-truths, showering him with flattery, even going so far as to forge letters to get Brutus on his side.
And Brutus, he's always painted as this tragic hero, a man of principle. But was there more to his decision to join the conspiracy than meets the eye?
You're right to wonder about Brutus. Yeah, they call him the noblest Roman of them all, but is that really what he is? He's caught between being loyal to Caesar and this belief he has that Caesar's ambition, might end up destroying the Republic.
Yeah.
And Cassius, he picks up on this, uses Brutus's own sense of honor to manipulate him.
So Brutus is driven by idealism, but maybe he's a bit too trusting, a bit naive. He buys into Cassius's scheming and actually convinces himself that Caesar's got to go for the good of Rome. But then, how does he live with himself after it's done?
Well, that's where things get interesting. Don't forget, this was the time when public speaking, rhetoric, it was everything. After Caesar's assassination, Brutus gives this speech to the people, tries to justify what they did using logic, rational arguments. He's basically saying Caesar would have made them all slaves, that getting rid of him was the only way to protect their freedom.
So he's going for the intellectual approach, appealing to their sense of civic duty. But what about the emotional side of things? That's where Mark Antony comes in, right? With the whole powerful funeral oration for Caesar.
Exactly. And that's where you see how limited pure logic can be in the face of raw emotion. Antony, he was a master of pathos. He knew how to work a crowd, played on their grief, their anger, even their love of a good spectacle. He reminds them of how generous Caesar was, his victories in battle, starts planting seeds of doubt about the motives of the conspirators.
And then there's the friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Last line, classic. No wonder the crowd went nuts, ready to tear the conspirators apart.
It just goes to show you the power of language, you know. Antony understood that sometimes you have to connect with people's hearts, not just their heads. That scene is like a masterclass in rhetoric and how to use it to get what you want. And it completely changes the game in the play.
Talk about a turning point. So what happens to Brutus after Antony's speech? I'm guessing he doesn't get to retire to a beach house somewhere.
Let's just say Brutus isn't exactly winning any popularity contests at this point. He and Cassius have to hightail it out of Rome, and the whole thing explodes into a civil war, those loyal to Caesar versus, well, the assassins and their supporters.
All out chaos. So who's leading the charge for Caesar?
It's actually a triumvirate. 3 heavy hitters join forces to take down the conspirators.
A trifecta of power. Who are they?
You've got Mark Antony, of course, wants revenge, and he definitely wants power. Then there's Octavius, Caesar's adopted son and heir. He's like the future of Rome, carrying the weight of his family legacy on his shoulders. And last but not least, Lepidus, a powerful general who sees an opportunity to climb the ladder amidst all the chaos.
Brutus and Cassius against these guys. Talk about an uphill battle.
Yeah, the odds aren't exactly in their favor. But before the big showdown, Shakespeare lets us see how this is all messing with Brutus's head. The night before the Battle of Philippi, which is, the ultimate face-off, he's alone in his tent, struggling with his conscience.
Oh, man, the guilt trip setting in. What's going through his mind? Gotta be some serious second thoughts about the whole assassination thing, right?
More than just second thoughts, I'd say. He's haunted by what he's done, the bloodshed, the turmoil after Caesar's death. And then, to make matters worse, he gets a visitor.
A visitor? Who's dropping by at a time like this?
Ghost.
Hold on, a ghost? Like a spooky see-through ghost? Where did that come from?
Seems like it just materialized out of thin air. And not just any ghost, Caesar's ghost. This apparition, it appears before Brutus with this chilling message, basically foreshadowing his defeat and death at Philippi.
Talk about bad omens. You know things are about to get real when the dead show up giving unsolicited advice. But there's more to this ghost than just the scare factor, right? What's the deeper meaning here?
Oh, absolutely. This ghostly visit is Shakespeare's way of showing us what's going on inside Brutus's head. It's like his guilt and fear are taking on a physical form. He's realizing that he's unleashed forces he can't control. It's this stark reminder that even when you think you're doing the right thing, it can backfire in terrible ways.
So, with this prophecy hanging over him, Brutus marches into the Battle of Philippi. Did Shakespeare stick to the history books here, or did he get a little creative?
You're right. Shakespeare does play with the timeline a bit. Like, in reality, there were 2 separate battles at Philippi. It wasn't just a one-and-done thing. It dragged on over weeks. But Shakespeare streamlines it all, makes it this one big showdown.
Keeps you on the edge of your seat. So how does it all go down? Does Brutus pull off a miracle win?
Sadly for Brutus, no, it's not his day. It's a crushing defeat for him and Cassius. And remember, we're talking tragedy here. Shakespeare doesn't hold back on showing us what happens when things go wrong, but the consequences.
So no peaceful retirement for Brutus and Cassius.
No villas in the countryside for these guys. Let's start with Cassius, always the practical one, maybe a bit cynical, right? Once he sees how the battle's going, he chooses a quick death over getting captured, humiliated.
Dark, but kind of fits with his personality, always in control, even in death. What about Brutus? He always seemed like more of an idealist, How does he handle things?
In a way, his death is the most tragic. He's so committed to his ideals that he sees suicide as the only honorable way out, like the final act of a guy who truly believed he was doing right by Rome, even if it all went sideways. He actually asks his friends to help him die, but they won't do it. In the end, he falls on his own sword, with a soldier holding it steady for him.
Wow. Talk about tragic irony. The same ideals that made him go after Caesar, they're the ones that lead him to end his own life. It really drives home how even good intentions can go wrong, have awful consequences.
For sure. But here's the twist. Even though the conspirators lose, the play doesn't just end with a clear victory for Caesar's side. It's not that simple.
Really? What do you mean? I'd figure Mark Antony would be throwing a party with Brutus and Cassius out of the picture.
There's a sense of order being restored, definitely. Yeah. But Shakespeare throws in this final scene like an epilogue, where Antony, now the one in charge, actually honors Brutus.
No way, Antony. The same guy who turned the whole crowd against Brutus with that intense speech at the funeral. He's giving him props now.
It's an interesting moment. Antony, he acknowledges Brutus's flaws, the fact that he went about things the wrong way. But he also sees something admirable in him, in his intentions. He calls Brutus the noblest Roman of them all. Implies that Brutus was the only one who was really acting out of love for Rome, even if it was misguided.
It's almost like Antony sees a part of himself in Brutus. That ambition, the idealism, the willingness to go to extremes to get what they want.
It reminds us that history is messy, you know. It's not black and white. Even those we call heroes or villains, they're driven by all sorts of things. And sometimes it takes time looking back to really grasp the impact of their choices.
This whole deep dive has really made me think. We've covered the historical context, the political maneuvering, those complex characters, the tragic falls from grace. But the thing about Julius Caesar is that it's still relevant all these centuries later. It's incredible.
Totally. It's a story that never gets old. Power, ambition, betrayal, idealism, the price people pay when politics get messy, it's all there. And those themes, they're just as important today as they were back then.
It's true. We're still trying to figure out the same things. What's power really cost? Is it okay to break your own rules, for the greater good? Can one person really change the world?
And that's what makes Julius Caesar a classic. It's not just a history lesson, it's a reflection on what it means to be human.
And let's not forget all the ways it's been adapted and reinterpreted over the years. Grand operas, modern stage productions, even heavy metal songs. Its influence is everywhere. I bet you've heard the phrase, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves." That's pure Julius Caesar.
It shows you the power of Shakespeare's words, how he could get right to the heart of human nature in a way that still speaks to us, no matter the time or place.
He really does give you a lot to think about. As we wrap up our deep dive into Julius Caesar, we'll leave you with this. Imagine this playset today. Who's Caesar? Who's Brutus? Who's Mark Antony pulling the strings? And who gets to decide what's noble, what's right when it comes to power?
Big questions. Because when it comes down to it, Julius Caesar reminds us that the choices we make, even the little ones, can have huge consequences. And the fight for power, for fairness, for a better world, it never really ends, does it? It's a story that keeps playing out through history.
And that is a wrap on our deep dive into Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. We hope you've gained some new insights into this timeless play and how it still speaks to us today. Until next time, happy reading.